Well, it's nice to be here with you tonight. As I was introduced, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Arkansas Archeological Survey and our role in doing archaeology in the state of Arkansas. We have 9 research stations around the state. Our main office, coordinating office, is up at UA Fayetteville, and we have 9 other research stations, most of which are at other universities, but we also have 2 research stations that are at archaeological state parks. Plum Bayou Mounds State Park, used to be known as Toltec Mounds State Park. Has anyone ever been there? And then also at Parkin Archeological State Park, where I spent about 13 years working there as well. It's over in the, I don't know if that'll show up on there, but over in the eastern part of the state. And then we also have another nearby research station up on Pettigene at the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute up there. It used to be located at Arkansas Tech, but several years ago it moved up on Pettigene Mountain. And I was at UA Fort Smith for about 20 years, but when they put me in this new position, we had to close that research station. We didn't have the funds to continue both. But the mission of the survey is to conserve and research the heritage in Arkansas, the archaeological heritage, and communicate this information to the public. So our job is we keep all the archaeological records, all the site forms for all the sites we have in Arkansas. We do research on these sites when we can. We usually look for sites that we don't know very much about, want to learn more about. We have all these different station archaeologists. They have different specialties that they're interested in. And we do all kinds of research, different kinds of research on these sites. We also go out and look for new sites a lot of the time. We're often asked to come out by the public. Landowners ask us to come out and look at something that they found on their land. And part of the research on these sites, oftentimes we'll do surface collections on a site. That gives us an idea of what age the artifacts are on those sites. That's one way to do research. We also do archaeological excavations on some of these sites to learn even more. But usually it takes a lot. It usually takes a lot of time and money if we're going to do actual excavations. That's a big process. So we don't jump to that right away. Sometimes we might just put in a few test units on a site. But large-scale excavations come pretty rarely these days. But we do some at different times. So once you excavate things, you have to do it in a very careful way, right? You have to keep all the records. We map everything in. We know exactly where everything came from when we do excavations. We draw maps of what we find in each level of each unit. We take photographs of each level of each unit. We have to be able to put all that information back together on paper or on the computer once we're done, because as we excavate, we're destroying part of the site as well. But it does provide us with a lot of information about what's going on that site, especially excavations where we can see things in context. What is found with something else. That tells us the different activities that were going on that site. And once you get all that out of the ground, you also have to process all that material. Once you're done, we say for every hour we spend in the field doing excavation, we have to spend 4 or 5 hours in the lab and processing all that stuff, putting in databases, cleaning, sorting, analysis, and eventually the write-up of that research. So that all takes a lot of time. We also do a lot of public outreach like this. We come give talks to people. We go to visit schools. I was at Ozark High School yesterday talking to a couple of classes. We teach college. Most of our station archaeologists teach if they're on a university campus, then they're usually also teaching classes on that campus as well. So just some of the different activities we do. It was mentioned I'm in charge of, archeological, archeogeophysical research now. Up in the upper left there, you can see us using gradiometers to kind of get an idea of what's below ground. It's a method of remote sensing. It measures differences in magnetism in the ground. And we can pick up on things like pits that were dug, or burned houses, things like that, where they've disturbed the soil. It changes the magnetic signature on that spot compared to the undisturbed area around it. I'll show you some images of that here in a little bit. But again, we talk to school groups, we do laboratory work, we go out and look for sites, we do mapping, all kinds of different things. So we don't know exactly when people first came into Arkansas, but there's approximately 14,000 years of pre-contact and post-contact human activity in Arkansas. When I talk about pre-contact, we're talking about before Europeans came into this area, basically. You all know who was the first European that came into Arkansas? Do you remember? DeSoto in 1541. And where I worked at the Parkin site, we think he visited that site when he came across the river in 1541. So lots of history and throughout these years. So this is a map of Arkansas with a lot of little red dots on it. And these little red dots represent over 50,000 recorded archaeological sites in Arkansas. So we have the records for over 50,000 recorded sites, both pre-contact and post-contact. And you can see some areas, are darker than others. Some areas have lots of red dots. It doesn't mean the areas that don't have any, there's not any sites there. It just means that we've probably looked harder in some of those areas. In some areas, we always have to have permission to go on any land that we go on. So you can kind of pick out certain areas on here that you might be able to find, like right up here. Any guesses what that might be? It's right by Fort Smith, but it's Chaffee. Fort Chaffee. So they did a study on Fort Chaffee before they kind of were getting ready to change its mission, basically. And they did a thing where they tried to record every archaeological site on the property. So you also see above and below that some of the forest land. And the Forest Service has its own archaeologists. They're out doing this type of work as well. So some areas we've looked a lot harder than others. Talking about kind of different time periods. We have this is the way we divide up major time periods in pre-contact times. Starting with Paleo-Indian, about 12,000 BC, goes up to about 8,500 BC. That's when we still had some Ice Age animals still around at that time. So a lot of times, these were nomadic hunter-gatherers moving around. We do find mostly just isolated points, like Clovis points, to see that they were here. What we've never found in Arkansas is like a Clovis point in direct association with something like mastodon remains. But that has been found in nearby states, in Oklahoma and Missouri, places like that. But in Arkansas, we're still waiting for that find. But we know they were both here. We do find remains of mastodons. We do find Clovis points. So we know the Paleo-Indians were here. Around 8,500, 8,000 BC, we get into what we call the Archaic time period. And this graphic really doesn't represent it, but it was actually, a lot longer time period than all the others. It was about over 7,000 years long. And during that time, there was a lot of change, but gradual change. They went from being hunter-gatherers at the beginning of that time period to becoming more settled and staying in one spot towards the end. And towards the end, they were doing things like they started making pottery. They started building earthworks and mounds, things like that. You don't necessarily need pottery if you're on the move all the time. It's not something that's easy to carry around. It's easily breakable. So once they start settling down more, that's when the pottery making takes off. And that's really the division between archaic and woodland. Woodland time period is when pottery, the making of that or use of that just explodes. We start finding all kinds of pottery once we get into the woodland time period. Lots of small villages, sometimes burial mounds. A lot of trade happened during middle woodland times over the eastern U.S. Major trades were going on. We can find different materials, things like copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from out west, things like that, got traded all over the eastern U.S. We get up around 900 AD, and we get in the Mississippi time period. And that lasts up into the 1500s when we do have European contact. And at that time, there were different things going on around the state. Paleo-Indian times, and then we got the Dalton culture kind of in between Paleo-Indian and Archaic. And towards the Middle Archaic, that's when we start seeing kind of regional differences in the artifacts that we find. Not everybody was doing exactly the same thing anymore like they were in Paleo-Indian times or Dalton times. The same is true in woodland. We start seeing these regional differences throughout the state. Mississippi time period, agriculture becomes a really big thing. Corn, beans, squash. We have the Caddo down kind of in the southwest part of the state. We have what we call the Mississippian culture kind of in the eastern part of the state. In the eastern part of the state, we see some large towns, 17-acre towns that are fortified. They have like the Parkin site has a moat around it. And it had a wall around it, as described by DeSoto. And DeSoto describes that they were at war, with a nearby group, had been fighting for generations. Now I'll talk a little bit about some of the research I've done over in this area. And this was up on the Mulberry River back in 2017. I should say each year, each June, the Arkansas Archeological Survey, along with the Arkansas Archeological Society, puts on a training program every June for 2 weeks. And we pick a site somewhere in the state that we need to find out more about. We need to do some research on it. And we invite the public to register and come help us. And we teach people how to do excavations and how to keep records, and kind of teach many courses too, and like pottery analysis or lithic analysis, animal bone analysis, things like that. But some of the basic things we do is we teach basic excavation and basic lab work as well. This past year and what will be coming up this next June, we are working at Plum Bayou Mound State Park and doing some work there. But if you've ever had an interest in actually coming and helping with an archaeological dig, this is a way you can do it. You don't have to come for the whole 2 weeks. You can register for just a few days, or a lot of people do come for the whole 2 weeks. But it's a really interesting program. But this is one we did up on the Mulberry River back in 2017. It's actually on Forest Service land, and they wanted to know more about this site that was on their property. As you know, up on the Mulberry, the river can get kind of wild sometimes when we have floods and get some scouring events up there. And so this site we were looking at, you can actually see some possible abandoned or overflow channels kind of coming through the field there. And you can see where our excavations were. And what we found out was some of this site had been kind of scoured away or washed away. We found artifacts were redeposited in a lower area. But we did also find some features that were still in place. And that's one of the things we look at when we're researching sites is, how much of the site is still intact. So this is kind of what the training program looks like. Again, we teach people how to do the excavations. We usually dig in something like 2 by 2 meter units, usually 10 centimeters at a time, each level for about 4 inches. all kinds of different people help, from younger kids. I think they have to be at least 8 years old and be accompanied by an adult, of course, if they're under 17 or 16, I believe. And all the way up to lots of retired people come help us too. But this is this graphic illustrates the gradiometry or magnetometry that we did. So each one of these squares that you see here is actually 2 by 2 meters on this map. But these darker areas are showing us where there's a difference in the ground. There's a difference in the magnetism that's recording in the ground. So it kind of keys us in on where we might want to place our excavation units. This is a lot better than the old way we did it when we looked for, you know, a concentration of artifacts on the surface or did shovel tests to kind of get an idea of how many artifacts were in certain areas, or if we encountered a different type of soil or something like that. This gives us a much better idea of where we can place excavations. Now, I did pick up something down here that was more associated with the river, an old channel that had filled in, and that's actually where we did find a lot of artifacts that had been washed down into that old channel, or an overflow channel right there. But up where some of the red squares are, that's where we did our excavations. And we can kind of see, I don't think it's going to show up on there, but the 15 and 19 were very distinct. You know, you can kind of, those have a more distinct shape than those shapes up above it. But all of these things had features that we wanted to look at. And those dark areas, some of those turned out to be concentrations of rock. And these aren't natural concentrations, these were concentrated by the people. And they'd actually had these rocks in fire, they had heated them. And so we called those fire crack rock. But mixed in with all that were lots of flakes when they were making stone tools. There's a certain type of tool they were making at this site. They also made, you know, projectile points and things like that. But the major activity going on at this site was making, this is a replica, but making tools like this. It was on a digging tool, or a tool they were using when they were doing gardening or agriculture. So lots of concentrations of rock. This is what, you know, in the lower right there, those are all the flakes. This type of tool is made out of a stone called argillite. Have you ever heard of that before? It's almost like a silt stone. You find it in a lot of the rivers around here, especially up on the Mulberry and some rivers further to the west as well. But down here you can kind of see the fire cracked rock. Then these are some one hole tool or a couple hole tools, and then broken tools, and just pieces of that argillite, and those are all flakes that they were knocking off when they made these tools. And then the lighter colored stuff you see are projectile points, as well as some chert. Those are made out of chert, and get a lot of chert flakes too. So these are what some of our test units looked like. You can see the concentrations of rock in these, and as we go down, the first one was 20 centimeters, this is 30 centimeters below the surface, 40 centimeters below the surface. So getting these, we call them rock middens in a way. So not super exciting, but you know, we did find all these broken tools as well as some hole tools mixed in with all this. And these were again, the type of tools they were making. It was almost a production area for making these tools. We can't say, the site is a lot bigger than the area we excavated in, so we can't say if this is the only thing going on this site or not. But where we excavated, this was the major activity. We weren't getting a lot of village debris. It didn't look like somebody was living right there in that area. We weren't getting all the animal bone, lots of broken pottery, stuff like that. We weren't getting lots of organics or anything where we could see they were throwing out lots of trash. And lots of different projectile points as well. So this site was actually used for different purposes at different times. We start finding points from the Middle Archaic time period, probably 4,000 to 5,000 BC, all the way up through Mississippian times when we get the arrow points in the upper right there. So they kept coming back to this same spot over and over and utilizing this area. In those rock middens that we found some nutshell. And we radiocarbon dated that. Some dated, between 121 BC and AD 62. Another one dated, which is in the level below it, dated 1507 to 1415 BC. We also found these more distinct anomalies when we were doing this with the gradiometry. And those turned out to be pit features where they dug a pit into the ground. And you can kind of see the edges of it that's darker within the pit. These were probably storage pits for agricultural purposes. Once they got done being used as storage pits, they just filled them with debris. And that's what we're finding. And this one was unique because it had down at the bottom you see a black area, a charred area. That turned out to be charred grass and a little bit of basketry or cane matting as well. We think they were lining these pits with that grass. We've seen that in bluff shelters where they line storage pits with grass to help protect what's in it. And in this case, their grass lining, once they were done with it, it just happened to, they may have thrown some hot coals or something like that in there, and it actually charred it before they backfilled it. So that's the first time we ever found evidence of a grass lining in an open site like this that wasn't in a protected bluff shelter.
How deep is that?
It's about, I think it's about that deep. It's about this wide or so. Those sticks are meters. They're a meter long, which you see. Each increment is 10 centimeters, which is about 4 inches. The other one was a pit as well. Again, you can see, the change in soil. There's lots of ash and charcoal mixed in that fill. And that's how we can define those pits. And you can see the different layers where they were backfilling it. It didn't get all backfilled at once maybe, but they were throwing, at different times they were probably cleaning out fireplaces or hearths and throwing stuff in there. There were some artifacts in there as well, but they weren't really loaded with artifacts or anything. Sometimes in trash pits you do get that. You get a lot more artifacts. And those two pit features dated later. They dated during Mississippi time, during the Mississippi time period. So we dated the organics that were in those, and it came out to AD 1216 to 1282 and AD 1160 to 1264. So that's likely when they were, using those as storage pits in that time period instead of the early archaic. So we did find out more about this site. The deposits do appear to indicate, in this area where we excavated on the site, they were doing a lot of production of these tools. There was lots of debitage. We had probably over 30,000 flakes from the argillite alone, as well as some of the chert flakes. To a lesser extent, there was chert projectile points and tools. We did find some ceramics, but very just tiny pieces. We didn't find like a big piece of pottery or anything like that. So likely used for storage of plant materials. But this site, we could tell this site had been scoured too, and a lot of the site had been washed into a lower area. And we could tell that by, we were finding artifacts in that lower area where the time periods were all mixed up. We were finding Mississippi period arrow points down towards the bottom, and what should have been older points up closer to the top, things like that. Now, we'll move a little bit ahead in time. When I was at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith, had the research station there. One of the reasons that research station was created in the first place because UAFS had acquired a historic house in downtown Van Buren. Has anyone ever heard of the Drennen-Scott? So they acquired this site and they knew they were going to need help dealing with the archaeology on the site. So they asked us to help out. We said, well, can we just create a research station? So we can have someone close and help out with this. They were rehabilitating this house and turning it into basically a teaching laboratory and museum. So there was going to be quite a bit of ground disturbance, and we wanted to go in ahead of that and recover as much information as we could before that happened. So this is the house built by John Drennen, one of the founders of Van Buren. It started out as a one-room structure in 1838 and was added on to over the years. Drennen died in 1855, but the house was continuously owned by descendants of his daughter and son-in-law until it was acquired by UAFS in 2005. That's pretty unusual for something to stay in one family that long. And they still had 19th century furniture and all these things in the house. It was pretty amazing. Has been on the National Register since 1971, so it's been known about for a long time, even before this. And the house was restored as a museum and laboratory classroom for the Historic Interpretation Program at UAFS. So I said he was one of the founders of Van Buren. He was a businessman. He had a mercantile store along with his business partner. He was involved in politics at the time. And he was also an Indian agent. He was appointed Indian agent for the Choctaw, and also later superintendent for Indian Affairs for the Southwestern District, so over most of the removed tribes that were over in Oklahoma. If you've ever done any research into Cherokee ancestry, there's something called the Drennen Roll, which was a census of the Cherokee at that time. So here's the house up at the top there on a bluff kind of overlooking the downtown and the Arkansas River. And I'm also going to talk about the Willhaf House here in a minute, which UAFS also acquired after the Drennen House. You can see the courthouse in the lower right there. And this is a 1888 perspective map of Van Buren, which shows both houses. Of course, these are great, but you can't treat them like a photograph, because there was artistic license when they drew these. Have you seen these before? So it's like they went up in a hot air balloon and someone did a sketch of the town. And they did these for lots of towns throughout the eastern U.S. So the original front porch had been wood. At some point the family changed it to brick, and one of the things they did was restore it to a wood front porch. So when they took the brick off, we recorded what was underneath. We found some of the original foundations for that wood porch underneath. Found some interesting artifacts, some coins, that perforated silver piece that had a design etched in it. There was a sidewalk out front that we uncovered again. It had concrete poured over it. Unfortunately, all that brick was pretty rotten. That's why they covered it over in the first place. So they did remove all that and then recreated that sidewalk. If you go there today, that's what you'll see is the recreation. And we also did geophysical survey, remote sensing on different parts of the property as well, especially in the backyard. It turned out interesting. Where the arrow pointing, you kind of see a rectangular darker area there. That sticks out. That doesn't look natural at all. So that's one of the places we wanted to investigate first. And we did a unit and came right down on some stone and some brick that was there. And no one remembered any structures being in the backyard at this time, and anyone living there was no memory of any structures in the backyard. That metal pipe going through came later and actually destroyed part of this feature. But in this first unit we dug, we also found these two things: the U.S. military button I believe from a greatcoat that dates to the early 1800s. And also that thing on the right. Does anyone know what that is? It's actually a cannon shot fuse. And there was actually Civil War activity on this property after the battle at Prairie Grove. So the Confederates were on the south side of the river, and the Union occupied Van Buren for a short time. And they were likely sitting up on this property overlooking the river, kind of skirmishing back and forth across the river. So we uncovered more of this foundation, trying to figure out what this was exactly, and determined it was likely a chimney foundation. It was there in the backyard. And over to the right there, you see it says kitchen pier. There's a stack of rocks kind of sitting there by itself, and we determined that was likely one corner of the kitchen, the original detached kitchen that no one remembered. There were a couple other kitchens associated with the house that had been attached later on. And so we spread out and actually found the other three corners right where they should be. So the kitchen sat on piers, one at each corner, and then had that foundation for the chimney as well. And right behind it, we had the smokehouse foundation, and found the various corners of that as well. And it wasn't piers, it was a solid foundation all the way around. It's what you'd want in a smokehouse, because you don't want, you have to have that enclosed, basically. Found some other features. There was a kind of a basin, maybe for washing, right beside the kitchen. Had a stone-lined drain. You can see on the left there, it had basically a ditch was dug and lined with stones, and then it was actually capped with stones too when we uncovered it. And where you see those stones in that ditch, that's the original ground surface. At some point they tried to level out the backyard and add a lot of fill to it. And so the original surface is kind of preserved under all this. So when you see the chimney foundation, the bottom of that chimney foundation was actually built on top of the ground at the time, and they just added fill around it later on. And then there's part of a retaining wall that was built likely when they were kind of leveling out, terracing that backyard. It is interesting because no one remembered any of this. So it was real interesting to find. Up in the upper right there is inside where the arrow is. You can kind of see a white layer up above that, and that's the ash that was in the bottom of the smokehouse. In that ash, that you had some shot was in there, some animal bone, things like that you typically find in a smokehouse. And then again, down here, the original ground surface is down here. And then all that was added later on. So it kind of looks something like that. There was a pretty good slope to the backyard. Lots of artifacts from the mid-1800s. Inkwell, bone buttons, shell buttons, rubber buttons with the Goodyear patent information on them. Domino, a bone domino. Parts of pipes, a French gunflint, and a bone-handled toothbrush. The bone-handled toothbrush actually said made in France on it. A bottle from a local druggist. I think that was probably from the 1890s. And this was really interesting. This is a Civil War era military uniform button, a Union military button. So, and it does date right to during the Civil War. So that's good evidence again that the Union Army were on the property during the Civil War. And then we found this button that had a Latin motto on it, "Behold how good." Does anyone recognize that motto? It's from the University of the South, Sewanee. And we think one of Drennen's grandsons went to that school.
It says it on the back.
Mm-hmm. On that one it does, yeah. On the other one it didn't say it.
Oh, okay.
Well, I always find it really interesting. We found the broken piece on the left, and there's a representation of what the whole one would have looked like, but I think it's great that they advertised hair care products containing genuine beef marrow. You don't see that kind of ad today. We also found this. We still don't know exactly what it is, but it had these kind of letters, conjoined letters, kind of etched into this or inscribed into this little piece of metal. And we looked at that and we had a pretty good idea what it was, and it was Cherokee syllabary. Do y'all know what Cherokee syllabary is? The alphabet for the Cherokee. But we don't know what this piece of metal was for. We did show it to Jerry Thompson, archivist with the Cherokee National Historical Society. And he said by itself it really doesn't mean anything, but if you add it on to some other things, it could mean these different, have these different meanings. But it wouldn't be typeset, it wouldn't be a seal or embossing because it would render the image in reverse. So as you're looking at it, that's the way it's read. So still not quite sure what this piece is. And just one thing about this site, the university owned it. I taught an introduction to archaeology class there on campus. As part of the class, I would have the students participate in the excavations for 6 hours each. So they would come out and get some hands-on experience on what archaeological fieldwork was like. And we also had other volunteers come out and help as well. And we also have the Willhaf House, which is just down the hill from Drennen. Willhaf was a German baker that had a bakery in downtown Van Buren in the 1800s. So it started out as a two-room dog trot, the red part. 2 rooms were added on in the back, and then a third room was kind of added on to the back corner as well later on. We did more geophysical survey on the property to see what we could find. And we did find right behind what would have been that last addition onto the house, we found you can kind of see the arrows are pointing to that area. It was a pretty good anomaly that was showing up there. We did some excavations in that area. The one on the left, the anomaly on the left, was a pier for the porch of that room. And then when we uncovered the rest, we started finding more foundations. But that turned out to be part of a cellar that no one remembered. It was another cellar. There was one cellar under the house, but no one remembered this one. And in the entryway, the steps going down in there, we found when they were no longer using it and backfilling it, they threw some crocks in there. And that's what you're seeing is pieces of crockery coming out of the steps in a barrel ring. And that's what it looked like, the steps going down. We didn't excavate all of it. It goes on back under that pile of bricks, but on each side you can see slanted bricks that would have had a vaulted brick roof or ceiling to it sticking up above the ground. Those bricks weren't fun to dig through. And those were the we managed to piece together the two crocks that were broken on the steps there. One on the right was a butter churn. We think that symbol may indicate 6 gallons. And those were probably from the 1800s as well. And that's what the house looks like today. And both of these houses are open. They have limited hours, but you can go tour the properties. And one other, just mention one other project we worked on. Did you all know there was a Native American mound within the city limits of Fort Smith? It still exists. Unfortunately, in the late 1960s, somebody chopped off, took a bunch of the eastern part of the mound for fill. And prior to that, there had been you can see on this map here, for one thing, there was a family cemetery on top from the people that owned that area, farmed that area in the late 1800s. And then they had someone had dug a tunnel or a root cellar into the east side of the mound. And that's why you see that the metal is covering the entrance to that tunnel back in the early 70s. Because kids kept getting in there, and every time they cover it up, the people would tear it back open and start getting in there again. In 2017, the Archaeological Conservancy acquired this site in 2005. And they're a nationwide nonprofit that obtains, either through buying or donation, archaeological sites and protects them. So they own this site, and in 2016, burials, some of those cemetery burials on top started washing out. So we got them to reconstruct the east side of the mound, which took 50-some dump truck loads of fill. And we used a completely different fill type, so it would always be obvious in the future what had been repaired. And up here, you can actually see this is, we did some profiling of the mound while it was exposed. You can see some basket loading of dirt. When the Native Americans built it, they were just dumping basket loads of dirt. And there were also a couple of post molds where posts used to sit. So there was a surface within that mound. It was built up so high at one point, they built a structure on it. Then they built it up a little bit higher. And we were looking for evidence of that. And we did some geophysical survey with ground penetrating radar to look at this. And this is a type of remote sensing that it sends basically a wave of energy down that will reflect back off of objects or harder surfaces in the ground. And it actually takes slices instead of looking at it horizontally. A lot of what we look at is slices as it goes down. And we can see that mound stage where the mound had been built up to a certain point before, used, and then the mound had been built higher later. Can you see the different slices? And there was also a tunnel dug into the south side of the mound, in the front of the mound. And we started seeing evidence of that. Then as we got over to the east side, you could see that tunnel disturbance. So this is the type of thing you get when you use ground penetrating radar. It doesn't really show you something distinct. You have to just look for those different waves of reflection, basically. Sometimes you see in the movies, especially I always remember the original Jurassic Park movie when the paleontologists are out there working on the dinosaur excavations, and they do some remote sensing. It shows a skeleton on the screen. No, none of it works like that. But that's all I have for you for now. Just kind of a brief introduction of some of what we do as archaeologists in the state.
Wow, that's a beautiful picture.
That was at where we were camping for the training program this past June. It's right off the Arkansas River. I could show you another one that wasn't quite so beautiful because the mayflies. bloomed right at that time, so all you saw was all these black dots in the sunset.
Beautiful sunset.
Y'all have any questions?
Tim, where's the Indian Mound on the Kavanaugh Mound? You said?
It's actually on Kavanaugh Road, or just off Kavanaugh Road behind a church.
Okay.
But like I said, the Archaeological Conservancy owns that. Actually, it's right next to Indian Mound Trailer Park,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately,
So you can always Google that, I guess, to find it.
probably. But it's been there for years. But the strange thing is, when we were doing all that work, we never found one artifact. And no one's ever found, there's never been any recorded artifacts found associated with that mound. Now, there may have been a village or something close by that's been destroyed, because it's right in the middle of town, where all the artifacts, the living was going on. But it's very strange, even when earlier people investigated this mound, and that's why the tunnel was dug into the front. People were looking for artifacts, but nothing has ever been found. That's probably why it still exists, because they weren't finding anything. If they would have been finding stuff, they would have dug it completely away.
Do you have any information about Indian influences in Charleston?
I mean, they were around that area.
Is it what they believe it to be, a historical site for their Indian influences, or history?
You mean for the
Well, it has to do with the prison.
the prison? We've never looked on that property, so we don't, as far as I know, no one's ever, I think actually I think it's either in the works, or I think they are going to do a survey out there. But some of the stuff I've seen, I haven't seen much evidence for it.
A question about the Drennen-House, the kitchen and the smokehouse in the back there.
Mhm.
Is there any evidence that it was like a fire or something that took them out?
Actually, it's
That's
possible.
Of that era with the
Yeah.
kitchen, burning down. That's why I kept it out.
Separate, yeah.
Yeah.
It's possible when they were doing well, it's obvious on the house, and you could really see it, and I don't have the photograph with me, but when they tore what was probably the second kitchen off the back of the house. They had actually taken a structure about the size of the detached kitchen and just moved it up and connected it to the rest of the house. It's about that size. We can't prove it was the same structure, but that's a possibility. But I didn't see any evidence around that of a lot of burning in place right there.
So you no longer have office at
UFAS.
Anymore? Do they not have the program or the course available anymore?
Not anymore. They had an anthropology minor for a while, and that's what I was teaching in, but they had dropped that while I was still there. So the last few years I was there, I actually didn't teach. And then when they asked me to take on this new job, we just didn't have enough money in our budget to do both.
That's a shame.
Tim, the first place you were talking about on the Mulberry up there, you said that there was no signs that anyone was living there, that it was a place that was,
At least we could tell. It looked, we didn't see any heavy village activity like you would expect, like lots of trash thrown out and all that. But we didn't look at the whole site, though. We just looked at one small part of it. It could be that we didn't look at the right part.
Well, that's what I wondered, is does that kind of make you do more research into the surrounding area to try to find a village, to try to find where all those people live?
Yeah, eventually we'd like to. And it may be that they didn't live right there because of the floods, but it was too volatile to live that close to the river. I'm not sure.
So you really haven't researched nearby enough to know where they may have lived?
Right.
Wow. So could
We
be a
just
lot of
haven't
stuff
had
up there.
time.
Yeah.
We just got done processing all that, so
8 years ago, from 8 years ago?
yeah, and getting it written up. But
Right.
How did the transformation from Paleo Indians to what we now know as tribes like Quapaw, Choctaw, Caddo, were they all Paleo Indians at one time, and then by settling more, becoming more farmers and settling down when they no longer were hunter-gatherers? Is that when when they started segregating into tribes?
Yeah, exactly when, I can't,
Is there any?
I mean, you see a lot of, even probably the late archaic times, you start seeing those, regional differences and things like that. We can't trace tribes back, known tribes today, we can't trace them back very far because, especially when Europeans started coming in on the East Coast, people started getting pushed around, moved around all over the place, and things were pretty dynamic. But I imagine they started, as they started settling down and kind of becoming more regional, then probably differences between groups developed.
So we still hold that they came in on the Bering Ice Bridge?
Yeah, the land bridge up there, but it's looking, I don't know, there's some evidence now that people may have been here earlier than what we thought, and it may be they were coming along the coast as well. It's so hard to find good evidence from that far back because there were so few people and they didn't stay in one place very long, so it's hard to find those campsites. The sea level back then was several hundred feet lower than it is today because a lot of the moisture was tied in glaciers on the continents. And that means if they were coming along the coast, all those sites are underwater now as the water has risen. So, but every once in a while we're finding more evidence that they may have been here earlier than we thought for lots of years. There's arguments. Some people don't want to believe it, but I mean, you have to look for what evidence is there and then test the evidence.
It's sort of hard to find stone packed proof from back then too. It's not carved in a block where we can just open it up and read it.
We find what they left behind. Usually that far back, stone tools and things. We may not be able to find anything organic to date to those tools or anything. So you have to have very special sites where everything is just right.
All right, anybody else got any questions for Tim?
Have you been to our Indian rock house up on Spadron?
The Serpent Cave?
Not sure if, is that north of town? Or
Yes.
I have been to one up there that kind of has two openings. Has kind of a pillar
Yeah,
in the middle.
it's got a protected status, because when I was a little kid, there was too much spray paint around,
Mm.
and, but it's protected now.
And that's privately owned, or?
There's pictures up there on the wall.
Yeah, I think we got permission to go up there. Yeah, we got permission to go up there several years ago, and we did a scan of that. So,
It's been on the National Register for, I think, since the 90s, maybe earlier. But
yeah, it's pretty fantastic. You have the kind of different types of rock art up there, higher up and then down below.
we try to keep it protected.
And it wasn't us that spray painted it.
It wasn't you as a teenager?
question. When you're doing these digs and you come across a rock, how do you know it's a tool and not just a rock?
Lots of experience. We can see the way certain tools were, the way they shaped them, either grinding or taking flakes off. You can usually see that just through lots of experience, basically. But usually you can see some type of alteration to it that looks uniform.
All right, well, Tim, we thank you.
Sure.